Okay, chapter 6 continued. Or chapter 4. Chapter 8 continued. Murray got to me next. He was a little redhead kid. He wasn't in the other room for 2 minutes when the door opened and a big man with a cigar in his mouth came out. No, 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 he shouted. He's not the type at all. Murray was crying. His mother yelled at the big man. What do you know anyway? You wouldn't know a treasure if you found one. She shook her fist at him. Janet whispered to me, that's Mr. Vincent, the president of Tattlebike. Mr. Vincent walked to the center of the room. He looked around at all the kids. When he looked over at us, he pointed and called, there he is. That's the kid I want. I thought he meant me. I got excited. I could just see myself on TV riding the Tattlebike. All my friends would turn on their seat sets and say, hey, look, there's Peter. Well, I was thinking about what fun it would be. Mr. Vincent came over to us and grabbed Fudge. He lifted him up. Perfect, he said. He's perfect. The mothers who were waiting packed up their kids and left right away. Mr. Vincent took off with Fudge in his arms. Janet chased him. She called, but Mr. Vincent, you don't understand. I ran after Janet. Mr. Vincent carried Fudge into the other room. He announced, I found him myself, the perfect kid to ride the Tattlebike in my new commercial. Mr. Vincent put Fudge down and took the cigar out of his mouth. There were 2 other men in the room. One of them was Mr. Denberg. The other was my father. Hi, Daddy, Fudge said. George, my father told Mr. Vincent, this is my son. He's no actor or model. He can't make your Tattlebike commercial. He doesn't have to be an actor or model. He's perfect the way he is, Mr. Vincent insisted. Now look, George, we want to make the best possible commercial for your company. But Fudge can't be the boy to ride the Tattlebike. Now you listen, Hatcher, Mr. Vincent raised his voice. I wondered why he called my father Hatcher, just like Mr. Yarby did. Mr. Vincent pointed to Fudge. Either that kid rides my Tattlebike or I'll take my account to another agency. It's that simple. My father looked at Mr. Denberg. It's your decision, Warren, Mr. Denberg told my father. I don't want to be the one to tell you what to do. My father picked up Fudge and held him on his lap. Would you like to ride the Tattlebike, Fudge? It's just like the one you have at home. Why are you asking him, I said. What does he know about making commercials? My father acted like he'd forgotten I was even around. I'm thinking, Peter, he said. Please be quiet. Well, Hatcher, Mr. Vincent said, what'll be? This kid of yours, or do I move to another agency? I remember how my father lost the Juicio account because of Fudge. Now maybe he loses this one too. I don't think he can afford that. Finally, my father said, all right, George, you can use him on one condition, though. What's that, Hatcher? Mr. Vincent said. The commercial has to be made this afternoon. After today, my son Fudge won't be available. That's fine with me, Hatcher, Mr. Vincent said. Is he going to get paid? I asked my father. I'll worry about that, Peter, my father said. That probably meant yes. He'd be paid and have lots of money in the bank. I'd have nothing, and someday I have to borrow from him. No, wait a minute, never. I'll never borrow money from Fudge. I'll starve first. Can I at least watch you make the commercial, I asked. Certainly, my father said. You can watch the whole thing. I turned to Mr. Denberg. Will Fudge be famous, I asked. No, not famous, but a lot of people will think he looks familiar, Mr. Denberg said. I turned to Mr. Vincent. Do you know he has no top teeth, right? That's part of his charm, Mr. Vincent said. He cut off all his hair 2 months ago. Well, he looks fine now, Mr. Vincent said. And he can't even talk in long sentences yet, I told everyone in the room. He doesn't have to say a word, Mr. Vincent told me. I couldn't think of any other reason why Mr. Vincent shouldn't use Fudge in his Tattlebike commercial. It was settled. Soon Fudge would be famous television star, and I would be plain old Peter Hatcher, 4th grade nothing. Let's begin right after lunch, Mr. Denberg said. We should get it filmed in about 2 hours. While my father and Mr. Denberg worked out all the arrangements, I asked Janet where the men's room was. She walked me to it. I told her thank you, and that she didn't have to wait. I'd find my own way back. When I was safely inside, I looked at myself in the mirror. I wish Fudge had never been born, I thought. Everything good always happens to him. If he had to be born, I wish he would have been born. He could be 9 or 10 like me. Then Mr. Vincent wouldn't want him to be the one to ride the Tattlebike in his commercial. Janet sat down to the coffee shop for some sandwiches and drinks. After we ate, we all walked to another section of the agency where the cameras were set up. A make-believe street scene was the background. The Toddle bike was shiny red. My father told Fudge all he had to do was ride it around. Fudge liked that. He zoomed all over the place. Vroom, 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 he called. My father, Mr. Vincent, and Janet sat on folding chairs and watched the action. I sat on the floor at my father's side. Mr. Denberg was the director. He said, "Okay, Fudge, we're ready to begin now. You ride the Toddle bike where I tell you, and I'll take a picture of you doing it, all right?" "No," Fudge said. "What does he mean, Hatcher?" Mr. Vincent said. "Why did he say no?" My father groaned. "Look, George, using Fudge was your idea, not mine." Mr. Denberg tried again. "Okay, Fudge, this is it." The cameraman said, "Start riding this way. Ready, set, go." Fudge sat there on the toddler bike, but he wouldn't pedal. "Come on, kid, let's go," the cameraman called. "Nope, don't want to," Fudge answered. "What's with this kid, Hatcher?" the cameraman asked. "Fudge," my father said, "do you want the nice man? Do what the nice man tells you to do." "No, don't have to." Janet whispered in my father's ears, "How about some cookies, Mr. Hatcher?" "Good idea, Janet," my father told her. "I have some Oreos right here," she said, patting her pocketbook. "Shall I give them to him?" "One at a time," my father said. Janet walked across the room to Fudge. He was sitting on the Toddle bike. "If you do what the nice man says, you can have a cookie," Janet told him. "Show me." Janet held up a box of Oreos. She was really well prepared, I thought. She must eat all day long. What, with crackers shaped like goldfish and a whole box of Oreos, too? I wondered what else she had in that pocketbook. "Gimme," Fudge said. Janet held up one cookie. Fudge reached for it, but Janet didn't let him get it. "If you do what the nice man says, you can have an Oreo. Maybe even 2 or 3. First cookie." "First, do what the nice man says," Janet told him. "No, first cookie." "Give him one, Janet," Mr. Denberg called. "We haven't got all day to fool around." Janet gave Fudge one Oreo. He ate it up. "Okay, kid, all ready now," the cameraman right over to me. Fudge didn't do it. Mr. Vincent was losing his patience. "You get that son of yours to ride my Toddle bike, or I'm taking my whole account away from you and your agency." "Must I remind you, George, using Fudge was your idea, not mine," my father said. "Forget about whose idea was, Hatcher. He's your kid. You better get it through to him now." "I have an idea," my father said. He walked to the corner of the room and beckoned the others. Mr. Denberg and Mr. Vincent gathered around him, along with the cameraman and Janet. They looked like a bunch of football players huddled together talking about the next play. Soon my father called me. "Peter, would you join us, please?" "Sure, Dad," I said. "What is it?" "Peter, we want you to ride the Toddle bike for us, to show Fudge how it's done." "But he already knows how to ride, I said. "Didn't you see him zooming around?" "He won't do it for the cameras, though," my father said, "so we need your help." "Will I be in the commercial, too?" I asked. "Well, the Toddle bike is for really young children," Mr. Denberg said. "Otherwise, we'd have you do it in a minute." I got the message. It was like buying the shoes in like the Dr. Brown's office. They were going to use me to get Fudge to do what they want him to do. I wondered how anybody ever managed my brother without my help. I walked over to Fudge and told him I was going to ride the Toddle bike. "Get off." Fudge held onto the bike. "No, mine." "It's not yours," my father told him. But Fudge wouldn't move for anything. He closed his eyes and screamed. He can scream loud when he tries. So my father had to pull him off the Toddle bike. Fudge kicked and kept screaming, and I'll bet Mr. Vincent was sorry that he ever spotted my brother in the first place. I got on the Toddle bike. It was so small my knees practically touched the ground. But I managed to ride it around just where the cameraman told me. "See how nice Peter can ride the Toddle bike?" Janet said. "Here, Peter, come have an Oreo. You did that so well you can have 2 or 3 if you want." Fudge stopped screaming. "Me," he said. "What?" my father asked him. Me ride, me ride." "You can't ride as well as Peter can," Mr. Denberg said. "Can so?" "I don't think so," said Mr. Denberg. "You already had a turn. You didn't do what I told you to." "Me! You want to try again?" my father asked. "Again," Fudge said. Again. "Well, I don't know," Mr. Denberg said. "Well," Mr. Vincent said, chewing on a cigar. "Well," the cameraman said, scratching his head. "Please," Fudge begged. I never heard my brother say please before. Mr. Denberg said, "Okay, we'll give you one more chance." Fudge ran to the toddle bike. I got off and he jumped on. "Now," he said to Mr. Denberg. "Now," Mr. Denberg said, "ride this way, Fudge. Over here towards me." Fudge did as he was told, just like Pita. He said, "See, just like Pita." Janet gave me a kiss on the cheek. "You saved the day, Peter Hatcher," she said. When she wasn't looking, I wiped off my face. Her kiss was too juicy.